Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. In today's episode, we're talking about the modern content marketing industry and whether your average company can transform itself into a media outlet. According to some estimates, corporations across the world spend upwards of $42 billion a year on content marketing, and they do so with the philosophy that by acting like media companies, they can engender trust with potential customers and drive sales. One of the people who helped sell the corporate world on this marketing philosophy is Joe Pulizzi. In 2007, Joe founded the Content Marketing Institute, and through its constellation of articles, videos, courses, and conferences, it convinced thousands of executives that the frictionless distribution of the internet allowed virtually everyone to become a media company. I recently interviewed Joe about his journey. We discussed whether freelance journalists should take on content marketing gigs, which companies have been particularly good at content marketing, and whether we're currently in a content bubble. Before we jump into the interview, I want to talk about a recent edition of my newsletter. I went deep into the business model of a company called Newsflare. It's a platform that makes it easier for creators to monetize their videos by licensing them to broadcasters and brands. It's also launched its own Facebook and YouTube channels, which have collectively generated billions of views. It's a fascinating company, and the only way you can read about it is by subscribing to my Substack newsletter. To do so, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the words Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, on to my interview with Joe. Hey, Joe, thanks for joining us.
Simon, pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
So the big reason I'm having you on is because you helped shape modern day content marketing. And in fact, you got started in that industry before it was even rebranded as content marketing. What was it called when you first started working in it?
Well, you might be giving me too much credit, but yes, I've been in the industry for more than 20 years now. I started in custom publishing. That's what it was originally called in 2000. And it basically came from the magazine world. And you started to have this whole movement of there are brands out there that were doing their shiny new magazines. Of course, it's been around for a long time. It went from custom publishing to custom media. That's where I got involved with. I worked at a large business-to-business media company running their custom media department. And then as I got the itch to start my own business, what ultimately became Content Marketing Institute, I realized that if you're talking to marketers, marketing people, you have to call it something marketing. Like it has to be search marketing, direct marketing, social media marketing. So in 2007, when I left the corporate world and started what became Content Marketing Institute, I just acted, the whole team that we had over here, I just said, just call it content marketing, because nobody is going to pay attention to custom publishing, custom media, member communications. Nothing like that's going to work. Let's just call it what it is, content marketing. And it worked out fairly well because finally marketers out there started to notice because, call it something marketing. They're going to say, oh yeah, I should be doing that thing. And it worked out fairly well.
So probably the most famous example of custom publishing is AARP magazine, which is still to this day the largest circulation magazine. Pre-internet, it was really expensive to get into this because not only did you have to create the content, but you had to pay for the production, the distribution, everything like that, right?
Well, yeah, it was a totally different ballgame. I mean, if you wanted to do, let's say you were going to do some kind of a custom magazine, you're talking most likely, $50,000-$60,000 just to get something to send out to 15,000, 20,000 people. So, what are you going to do with that? Well, now we'll get into, the mid 2005, 2006. You've got Google, you've got social media on the rise. You've got anyone can access any piece of content they want to, and any company, no matter what size, can publish anything they want to. So costs just went plummeting. Now, by the way, I'm still a huge believer in print magazines. Actually, I think there's a huge opportunity lost by some of these companies that are killing their print magazines because they can't drive enough advertising. But that's probably a whole nother podcast in general. But the rules have changed. Anyone can be a publisher. Anyone and anywhere in the world can access that information. So we can't just rely on, we have these wonderful databases and we've got a lot of people with mailing addresses that we can send to them on a consistent basis. And we don't have to worry about any content competition. Well, that's not a thing anymore.
Tell me about how you engaged with clients back then, like 20 years ago. Like, were you actually running print magazines for them?
Absolutely. I mean, when we started, I started with Penton Media, which at the time was the largest independent business media company in North America. So this was February of 2000. And my first project was a custom print magazine for an association. Most of the stuff we did was quarterly. So a lot of it was member communications, like the AARP one you mentioned. So same thing. And then we did, whether it was, certain niches that Autodesk wanted to cover, or HP wanted to cover, or Microsoft ended up being, different executive type magazines. Some of them went to 5 to 10,000 people. Some of them went to 200,000 engineers. So it just depended, but I love the process of, okay, we've got to find an editorial expert, a journalist to make this thing work. We used to put all the things in motion to make it happen. Audience development. I mean, everything that you do now from online, but in print, the process was so much slower because we were working a quarter at a time. I mean, it was a lot of work, but if you think about, you've got your daily things, I do a newsletter every 2 weeks. Most people are doing daily content pushes. It's just changed quite a bit. But at the same time, I think people have forgotten how impactful lean back media is, which is what I call print, where you're not necessarily you don't have a question in mind. You're sort of looking for the questions and answers as they come to you when you're reading a piece. And that's what I think is lost about that print experience going bye-bye in a lot of cases.
And back then, how did you find an audience? Obviously with AARP, they have their huge membership. They automatically enroll each new member who they have their address, automatically enroll them as a subscriber to their magazine. But if you're producing something for HP or Microsoft or whatever, who read them? How did they find audiences?
Almost everything was a customer database. Everything. And that's how it works. So if we didn't have the customer database of some kind, I mean, basically just like if you were working for one of the key brands at Penton Media, if you were an Industry Week magazine or you were an HVACR magazine, whatever the case was, you leveraged telemarketing and postcards. I mean, that's how it all was done. I mean, if you remember, you used to get your postcard in the mail, or you used to get your wraparound to your print magazine and said, this is your last free issue. Go ahead and fill all these 45 questions out and you can get another keep your magazine going for the next year or two. That's exactly how we did it. And it's unbelievable that people actually filled those things out. So if we couldn't get it through the post, we would absolutely go telemarketing. And in those days, depending on the different magazine, you were talking $3 to $4, maybe $5 per name. So if you could get the telemarketing cost down to $1 or $2, you had ROI right off the bat, depending on how you were monetizing it, which still was mostly through print advertising. But generally on the custom media, custom publishing, content marketing side, you were working with a database they already had going to customers.
So Microsoft, they wanted to get into more, have their computers and Windows in more enterprise settings where an entire office might, adopt it. So they might buy a database or have a database of IT workers, and they would just they would have their addresses and they would mail it to them.
Absolutely. I mean, one I can think of, this is 2001. We were working with Agilent Technologies, which is at the time, I think, was still a part of Hewlett Packard. And Agilent wanted to target 150 VPs and senior VPs at different manufacturing companies around the United States. We came up with a list of 150. So they did a whole program of white papers and books that just targeted 150. Well, what's magical about that is we did the program for years, and all they needed was one or two of these to come in. So if they got one of these executives to say yes, it was a multi-million-dollar deal. So it made the hundreds of thousands of dollars they were spending on the custom program worth it. But that's what I loved about custom in particular in content marketing is we're not targeting everyone. You're not looking at, oh, great, this is a magazine that I can pick up on the stands at Walmart. You're targeting a very specific group of people. And that's why in the beginning, when I was trying to cover the area and figure out what was going on, you couldn't find the case studies because you didn't hear about them unless marketers talked about them or they applied for some kind of an award. And in 2003, 2004, 2005, the only thing you were hearing from is if you were talking to other agencies that were working on other projects.
And eventually custom publishing migrated onto the internet, became content marketing. But I feel like there was this time period where lots of companies had official blogs. This is in the 2000s. But most of those blogs, they were just used for kind of corporate announcements, almost like press releases. Not many companies during that time period were attempting to do true content marketing, right? Where they were actually trying to act like media outlets.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at one of the early examples, which was Channel 9 from Microsoft, that was one of the engineers that started to record things that was going on in their department. I mean, that happened by accident. And ultimately, that got taken down anyways because they didn't like it. But that's the type of thing. If you want to look at the earliest example, not earliest, I mean, content marketing has been around for hundreds of years, but just in our area where you looked at the launch of Red Bull Media House is kind of that natural progression where you see, I mean, Red Bulletin was launched at Monaco racetrack in 2005. They actually brought a full Heidelberg to the track so they could get the race results to the people leaving as they were leaving the racetrack about what happened. And the people from Red Bull said, well, we should do this on a regular basis. So they were hauling that Heidelberg from track to track, just printing these things on the fly. And ultimately that became Red Bulletin, and then ultimately became Red Bulletin, the big magazine that goes to 2 million people that you can get at every airport, drugstore on the planet now. And of course, Red Bulletin evolved into Red Bull Media House, which is one of the leading media brands in the extreme sports, maybe the leading media brand in extreme sports. So that's how these things normally happen. They usually start by doing one little project, and that little project sort of melds into some other things. And then they realize, oh my gosh, like this could really work. We're actually building an audience, and we can monetize that audience multiple ways. And Red Bull was one of the first ones to figure it out.
Yeah, I seem to remember like the tech blogger Robert Scoble, like he was an early Microsoft employee, or wasn't he employed by Microsoft officially early on?
I think he was, absolutely. Yeah, that was kind of it.
And he was on the campus like telling stories and stuff like that.
But that was weird how that whole thing, I mean, you're talking about, let's see, early 2000s. And then, I mean, as I used to, when I started my thing going to South by Southwest, and you had the corporate blogger, they were sort of looked down upon by the different companies they were working with. I think in a lot of cases like Scoble, it's just like you didn't know what to do with these. These are people that are talking about what's going on inside the company, and then do they own their followers and all kinds of things. It was a really weird moment. I remember that happened in Dell, and Dell was trying to figure out, okay, well, are these Dell Twitter addresses, or are these belong to the individual? So, I mean, the thing that just happened with, what was it, Labatard from ESPN, where they're like, okay, well, does this guy own his podcast subscribers? Does ESPN own it? We're still dealing with these kinds of issues.
I mean, I think that definitely was a form of negotiation. I think ESPN easily could have denied him those RSS feeds, and we've seen lots of other media companies refuse to do that for sure. But so tell me about the launch of Content Marketing Institute. Like, what was the original idea?
Well, okay, so I had the entrepreneurial bug and left the company in March of 2007 and started what became Content Marketing Institute basically the next day. It ended up being April 2nd, 2007. And the initial idea was what I called the eHarmony for content marketing. So what I thought was really needed were there's all these brands out there, a lot of ones we've been talking about, which had the money and the resources, but were terrible at telling stories and terrible at building audiences. But there were all these wonderful journalists and editors and custom content agencies that were great at doing it. So I said, okay, well, let's build this thing. I called it Junta 42. And, a brand would go online and they would fill out a little form for free. And then I would match them up with an editor or a journalist or a custom content agency. And through the matchmaking, we made a little bit of money. I thought it was going to be brilliant, but then, hindsight, you've got to remember, never build a business where you're reliant on marketing agencies for money, because they're the cheapest people on the planet. They will not pay for anything. So, okay, that was a big no-no. It sort of worked, Simon, but by the fall of 2009, the financial model was not going to work. There was no way I was going to make it, we lost our biggest customer, and I said, okay, well, time to get the resume ready. I got to go back to corporate world. This didn't work out. And luckily my wife said, just wait a couple weeks and, go, just take some time. Don't go jumping back now. You probably can't work in a corporate environment anymore. You're an entrepreneur. You're not going to be able to do this. So I luckily started going back through some of the information that our blog subscribers had sent us. So over this time, Simon, we built a pretty decent blog following and pretty good email addresses. That was called the blog was the Content Marketing Revolution. So we were covering sort of what was going on in the content marketing industry. And then I started to read all this feedback, and the feedback was, Joe, Do you have any ongoing content marketing training for our enterprise? Or Joe, are there any large scale in-person events for content marketing? And Joe, is there a magazine for content marketing that we could get on a regular basis and I can share with my team? And then it just hit me. I'm like, oh my God, I'm trying to shove this matching product down the throats of these marketers, and that's not what they need. It's way too far along. What they really need is just education and training. And so that's where I was probably drinking at the time, and that's where I pulled out a little a napkin, a cocktail napkin, and I actually wrote down the business model for what became CMI, and it said that we were going to create the leading online destination for content marketing education. We were going to create the largest in-person content marketing physical event, and we were going to create the leading content marketing magazine. And I said, we're going to do all this by 2013. So launched what became Content Marketing Institute in May of 2010. So right away, it took off. The Content Marketing Institute name just worked really, really well. We evolved the Content Marketing Revolution blog into that, launched Chief Content Officer Magazine in January of 2011, launched Content Marketing World in September of 2011. And I was hoping for 100, 150 people to come to Cleveland, Ohio for this event. I'm like, I don't know if we could do it. And 660 people showed up. We had 1,000 the next year. And then a few years after that, we had 4,000. So it really took off from there. But it was that move from this product that I thought was great, and then just listening to the audience that luckily we were able to build, and the audience told us exactly what they wanted to buy. And that's, Content Marketing Institute took off from there.
So it's funny because it seems like what you were originally trying to build was like an early version of Upwork. And that's wouldn't you say?
Exactly.
In terms of like matching people with creatives, but it sounds like it wasn't like
it was a horrible Upwork. Yes, it was absolutely terrible. It never would. It's funny. I got the idea originally. This was in 2005 from a company called Agency Finder. And I said, oh my God, that's it. So basically Agency Finder did exactly what it said. A brand fills out their brief, and they'd say, okay, here's the 3 or 4 agencies that you should be matched up with instead of doing all the work yourself. It's different today because Google really works fairly well, but then it was a little bit different. So we were going to do the same thing, and Upwork did a much, much better job. But the whole idea of education and training worked really, really much, much better, fit me much better, because I love the industry. I love what was going on. It was a passion area. So I could easily get out in front of an audience at Content Marketing World with my orange suit on and just parade around and say, we really got to get this thing called content marketing. And we had a lot of true believers, first movers that really made the community happen.
And was it just to start with? Was it just you blogging by yourself, and then you built up an audience, and then was like, okay, how do I leverage this audience to grow? Or did you have a staff right away?
Oh, right. Initially, it was just me blogging. So I think I started the blog on April 24th, 2007. That was the Content Marketing Revolution blog as part of Junta 42, which was the matching service. And, while I'm trying to do this matching thing, I'm pretty diligent about blogging 3 times a week, delivering value, building the audience. So we had 10, 15,000 email subscribers as part of that. So that's the blessed part of this, that we were actually building the media model at the same time I was trying to launch this crazy idea on the side. And then when I made the decision to say, okay, this is going to happen, we're going to pivot over to Content Marketing Institute, then we started to hire people. So hired Michelle Lynn as our chief editor, and she ran all the editorial, and we started hiring a bunch of different people just to make this thing go. And I think by the end of 2010, we had about 10 people working on at different parts of the group. You had audience acquisition. We were running webinar programs by then. We had people running the magazine. Then we had a whole event team that we brought in. So full-fledged media company grew pretty quickly.
And what were all your different revenue streams? Was it all monetized through the conferences, or were you monetizing other aspects of it?
So the initial one was called a benefactor program, which was just a sponsorship program. And the reason, Simon, why I had to go with that one is I had no money. So in September 2009, we were bleeding. And that's where I was like, okay, what am I going to max out another credit card? Like, what do I do here? And so I went out to some of the relationships that I'd been building for a long time. And I pitched them, I sent them a PDF of what Content Marketing Institute was going to look like. And I said, I've got 10 spots available. I said, I'm launching these. You want to be a benefactor. And if you're a benefactor, you get 10% of all the sponsor inventory. You get your logo at the bottom of every page. This is going to be the best thing ever. We'll get you a discount. And like, I was selling it as much as I could because I was desperate, frankly, to sell this thing. And I said, this will really work. And we had enough benefactors sign up initially. I think the initial rate was 10,000 and we then moved it to 15,000 just to keep the lights on, Simon, just so I could pay the initial people just to get this thing started. And then from there, the largest area of revenues, I mean, going into 2011, once Content Marketing World hit, was the event. I mean, we were really close the first year to being $1 million event. And so most of it, we were a 70% registration revenue and a 30% sponsor revenue event. And then the magazine broke even. That was all print advertising, print sponsorship. And then the rest of the revenue came from mostly webinar programs. The webinar programs were great. We ended up, by the time I left CMI in 2017, we were doing 2 to 3 webinars a week at about $15,000 to $18,000 per webinar. So that was a big revenue generation area for us. So we went from 2010 generating about $150,000, $200,000 in revenue to by 2015, we were almost a $10 million business.
And who were these sponsors? Like who were clamoring to advertise or promote themselves within your conference and your webinars?
So most of them were, some of them aren't around anymore. A lot of them are, it's the video companies. So you had the Bright Coves of the world. You had the content marketing companies like your NewsCreds, your Contently's were there. You had your email marketing companies like Emma and so basically all the categories for content creation, but the first movers of those areas. You had the initial marketing automation companies like your HubSpot, although we were a little bit competitive with HubSpot out there because they had their own inbound event. They were pushing inbound marketing. We were pushing content marketing. But it's anywhere where a corporation...
It's kind of ironic because their conference was a form of content marketing.
they were doing their own.
For HubSpot.
Exactly. I have lots of wonderful friends at HubSpot. I love Dharmesh Shah, the co-founder. He's fantastic. But the problem was they would land their event on top of our event almost every year, and it drove me crazy. I kept saying, please, can we figure this thing out so your event and our event would be at different times? So that was the issue that we had. But the initial sponsors were fantastic. PR Newswire was a wonderful initial sponsor, which I think is Cision now. So it's just amazing that what we've seen and now then there were probably 100, 150 sponsors we could go after. Now there's thousands. It's really blown up the entire content creation market, especially on the enterprise brand side.
So let's talk about where content marketing now fits within the media ecosystem. Like, would you say that content marketing, when it's done well, can put out as useful information as like a niche trade publication?
I think it could be better. I mean, it's the same. I mean, if you look at, then this is kind of what I've been seeing for a long time. Robert Rose and I wrote a book called Killing Marketing when we talked about this idea of media marketing, where the media model and the marketing model is exactly the same. And the difference is the revenue outputs. So if you're a media company, you're trying to build a loyal audience. And from that loyal audience, you generally have sponsorship programs, you have event programs, you have paid subscriptions, you have your general media direct revenue options. And then on the marketing side, you just have, instead of media type revenue, we are going to launch our own products, or we want to generate product sales or services sales, or we want to increase the yield and create better customers, or we want to have more loyal customers. Like most of these print campaigns were loyalty magazines, like an AARP or Walmart's magazine or whatnot. So it's interesting how that's happened. Now, I mean, and you've seen this as well. A lot of the people that used to work, I mean, I grew up in, traditional media, and a lot of the people that were on the editorial teams that were sitting down the hall from me, they're now working at brands because the brands can afford to pay them. And of course, you've got to get behind outside the church and state, and you've got to still make sure you have a quality editorial product that's really delivering value on a consistent basis. So I think any company, I don't care if you are perceived as a media company or a marketing organization, it doesn't matter. I mean, I see it as the same. I think in the future, you're going to look at, oh, yes, New York Times, that's what they do. And then you say, oh, there's Cisco Systems over there. Well, those are two very different companies. But if you look at how they're creating content, building audiences, you could say the quality is much different, but what they're trying to do is the same. They're trying to build a loyal audience ongoing, and they're trying to generate revenue from that audience.
And I feel like I still encounter purist journalists, though, who will always consider content marketing tainted because it's paid for by a brand. Like, how would you respond to someone who maintains that point of view?
You show me a media company that's not biased. Please. Mm-hmm. Every company is biased in some way, shape, or form. I mean, do you have to go and do we want to talk about the whole Fox thing? Do we want to talk about Dow Jones? We could talk about a lot of different companies that lean one way or the other. We're all coming at it from a different point of view. Now, if you're looking at a brand that's just pushing products out there, they're not going to be successful. If they're not delivering value to an audience, they can go out there and create all the content they want. They're not going to build a loyal audience. But there are a lot of companies out there that are doing a tremendous job of building a loyal audience. I mean, look at a company locally here. I'm in Cleveland, Ohio. Cleveland Clinic has a wonderful blog called Health Essentials. Yeah. Is their number one goal to drive you into their Cleveland Clinic hospital network? Sure. But that content's run by wonderful journalists and wonderful editors and an amazing team. And you could put a lot of that content against any other healthcare media company that's out there. So that used to be a case 10 years ago. I just don't think it is. And I think that the journalists that are having a problem with it should really, look at what's happened over the past 6 months. Are you kidding me? We just want to get through to an audience group that may trust us. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Just to build that trusting relationship, because media has just gotten rocked with the trust issue. If you look at Edelman's Trust Barometer that I think came out last week, media just took a nosedive, and businesses are the most trusted now. Where did that happen? How did that happen? This is terrible. But so now you could make a claim and say, well, if you're Amazon, you might be more trusted than the Washington Post. I don't know if that's true, but in some cases it probably is. That's how crazy this environment is that we live in right now.
Yeah. So I've spent several years with a diversified freelance career where I would write for some traditional news sources, everywhere from New York Magazine to The Atlantic, but I made the bulk of my revenue with various content marketing gigs. In fact, I would actually use those those mainstream media gigs as kind of like a way to differentiate myself to clients. I could be, anybody could claim they could write, but if I said I had written for these, well-known magazines, it definitely got me in the door much quicker. So I made most of my money through writing for associations and companies, and I wouldn't say everything I produced was golden, but I feel like I put out a lot of high quality information over the years. Do you think the modern day freelance writer, they have to be much more open about what gigs they take on and be willing to cross over into content marketing? I feel like those old days are gone where most writers could make, $2 a word writing for their favorite magazine. If those days even truly existed. Boy,
it's interesting. You and I both have a lot of freelance writer friends, and I don't fault them for any way you need to make a living. Sometimes you need to take certain gigs that you might not want. Sometimes you want to build your own brand while you have to go out and build it for other people while you're creating something. So I don't fault anything, or I don't fault the model. But if I'm talking to a freelance, let's say this freelance writer is a really good friend of mine, what I really would try to emphasize, and you've seen some of the success on Substack as well, but I'd say create your own audience. If you can build your own audience, you can do so many things. You could build a media product on top of that. You could do an event. You could build a product. You could sell other things. We've got social currency that I think is going to take off in the next 2 years, where you've got freelance writers and individuals out there that are creating money to put into their communities. And I think those things are going to work. There's a lot of ways to monetize an audience once you get one. So I would love to see, and by the way, that's my advice to anybody coming out of college that's a journalist, that wants to be a writer, that wants to learn how to get into marketing. I would say build an audience. I don't care if it's for butterfly collection or you're a YouTuber playing Valorant. I don't care what it is. If you can learn how to build an audience, you will survive in the future, either on your own, building your own media brand, or by getting a job at one of the largest, brands like an Amazon or a Google or a YouTube. Or I'll tell you what, if I'm looking at hiring somebody and somebody's learned how to build an audience, come on in, because you already know how to create content on a regular basis. You learn the art of audience acquisition. You learn the art of content distribution. I'm like, come on in. That's present future of marketing right there.
Yeah, I have an acquaintance. She's a photographer, and she'll do everything from, high-end campaigns that pay really well for like Pfizer, to doing freelance photography for like the New Yorker and the Washington Post, to just doing her own series that she posts to Instagram and enters into art festivals and stuff. And I don't know, I just think that's going to be, the future journalist, who's just like this diversified writer who's comfortable writing across several genres and business models, and, writing for themselves, creating their own content, creating for outside brands and media companies.
I think the models are almost unlimited. I mean, if you can tell stories on a regular basis to a targeted group of people and really provide value, I mean, that's the future of entrepreneurship right there. I mean, I really believe that, especially with what's happened with the lockdowns and COVID-19, if you look at over the next 3-4 years, the number of businesses that are going to be created, the number of entrepreneurs, well, what business model are they going to be using? They've learned how to build audiences. They've grown up in the TikTok, Instagram, blog, podcast era, whatever. And if you can build an audience, you just need to learn the business model to monetize that audience. And I think that's where it's at. Of course, if you're a freelance writer, you're right at the top, because you already understand how to tell a compelling story and figure out what the needs are of that audience. So I love that. I'd love to see more freelance writers take that leap and say, yeah, of course, do all the articles you want to do, but at the same time, look at where do you want to be in 5 years? And you could have your own thing in 5 years, and you could be financially independent in 7 years. But a lot of them don't. A lot of freelance writers don't necessarily plan that way. I just wish they would.
I've heard claims now that so many companies have bought into content marketing, the idea of it, that the ROI is going down. Like basically, if you started back in 2012 or so, you could see clear results very quickly. But now you have to push out so much more and better content before it shows up in your bottom line. Do you think, as this space gets more crowded, you're going to see, a lot more companies to, struggle to really break through, especially if they don't have huge content budgets?
I don't think that that's the issue. I think that you could start today and do actually better than you would have in 2012. I think the problem is that, enterprise brands do two things horribly. First of all, they don't find their content tilt, which is that's a differentiation area where they can really break through all that clutter. Generally, they talk about the same as all their competitors. Like, okay, cloud computing. Go do a search on cloud computing. IBM and Salesforce and Oracle and all the rest of them are talking the exact same thing. I mean, it's almost you could take the content, move it from site to site. Can't even tell the difference. There is a problem here. So you have to figure out, go that extra niche, if you will. I mean, if you go back 100 years, you would have said, oh, there's no more that can be printed. We've covered all those areas. Well, every day there's a new area to cover, and we've got to find that area. So that's the first thing. The second thing is enterprise brands are terrible at consistency. I mean, they really don't get it. The idea that if you're going to deliver a weekly newsletter, that you actually have to deliver it every week at the same time. It just boggles my mind, where I look and say, let's check out this blog. And I look at the blog and it's like, okay, you got 3 blogs in 3 days, and then you've got nothing for a month. And then you've got 4 other ones, or they do the same thing with the YouTube channel. I'm like, you really have to have consistency. Content is a promise to your audience, and you have to deliver it on a regular basis. They just don't do it. So my emphatic reply to what you're saying is, I think it's actually easier to do it. It's just nobody is doing it the right way.
Yeah, I've noticed that with like my own clients over the years where I'd get some new corporate tech, B2B tech client where they wanted to start, producing regular articles, but they wouldn't have a point person who's like full-time role, either full-time or under some kind of retainer was like to just focus on this thing. So it would be like someone in their sales department or marketing department who had 5 other jobs. So I would write like 3 or 4 articles for them, and then they would just get distracted by something else, and then I wouldn't hear from them for 3 or 4 months or ever again. And I feel like that's what kind of you're talking about, is like if you don't make this a priority, if someone isn't appointed to think about this as close to a full-time basis, either they're creating the content or they're the ones assigning it out to freelancers. Like it's just not going to get done consistently enough to where you could see an
You're
ROI.
exactly right. You can't treat, if you do it as a side project, it's better not to do it at all. I'd rather you spend your money on really good advertising programs than do half effort on any kind of blog or podcast or whatever. So I think that's a really important thing. You got to treat it like a product. I mean, you're creating a content brand. You're probably not calling it IBM's blog. It's probably got a name for it. Okay, let's say you're doing that. Well, you need a content team behind it. You need an audience acquisition team. You need a social promotion team that works with that. Generally, I mean, historically, you've had a content marketing group work in a silo. Generally, when I started, I used to go visit them. They were down in the basement by the boiler. You couldn't even find them. They were, oh, you're the custom magazine people? They didn't get any respect at all. Well, now the good thing is it's sort of elevated, but I think that content marketing is treated as a subservient role that's just trying to help them generate other things. I mean, if content marketing is, oh yeah, Bob's doing the blog or Jill's doing the podcast or whatever, or what if they're gone? And like you said, there's no really real focus on it. And sometimes I'm just like, well, you got to treat this like it's a thing. And the other thing is, you're not going to see results for 9 months, 12 months, most likely, outside of some qualitative stuff. You're not going to really see a behavioral change, and people are going to actually buy more products or stay longer or whatever. It generally takes 12 to 18 months, sometimes longer, to make this happen. Well, you've got CMOs out there that have a 6-month campaign mentality. So whenever I used to go in and do content audits, and they used to say, well, we did this content marketing campaign and I used to stop them. I'm like, what? It's content marketing campaign. There's no such thing as a content marketing campaign. A campaign stops. A content marketing initiative does not stop. Just like New York Times didn't launch and say, we're going to do the New York Times campaign launch for the newspaper. We're going to do it for 6 months and see what happens. No, they don't do that. Media companies don't do that, but brands do. You got to have the marathon approach rather than a sprint.
Yeah, it takes like 6 months before your articles even start to rank in search engines. And so that's 6 months from when you just started. So by the time the bulk of your content starts ranking in any meaningful way, that's just a year there. And that's just SEO, not to mention how long it takes to, start growing, on other channels like email and social media and stuff like that. I know you can speed up the process a little bit by doing like promoted posts on social media, and you can buy some audience, but a lot of, if you're an Intel or something like that, you can afford to do that. But if you're, a small to mid-sized company, like you're not going to have on top of a content budget, a huge marketing budget, which means you have to grow that audience organically. And yeah, it's going to take at least a year before you even begin to see an iota of results.
That's true, but I think where a lot of small companies go wrong is they spent all of their resources on organic content to start, and you can't do that. You should spend, let's say you have 100% of resources, about 25 to 30%, maybe a little bit more, should go to organic content, and 60 to 70% should go to promoting that content, because it's going to take a long time. And that's where, if I'm working with a small company.
When you say promoting, do you mean buying ads or just like the marketing, like, working on the newsletter, making sure to post regularly on social media? Like, what do you mean by that?
Any type of promotion and distribution. I mean, yes, getting it out there and distributing it, sometimes organically, you might need to get some people to do that. So spend some money on that. But a lot of that case is promoting that content. Absolutely. I have no problems with paid programs to get the content out there and to get the content found. Because if you're creating, let's say you're doing 3 blog posts a week or something like that, and you aren't getting any traction, which by the way, you probably won't for a long time. I'd rather you do 1 a week, and then the other Two, you could just take those resources and get that one out there and get that found and start building an audience and focus on audience acquisition. I mean, that's where a lot of, not just small companies, all companies go wrong, because they're like, okay, we have this idea for this content program. We're going to build a content brand and everything's going to be great. I mean, MailChimp just did this. By the way, I'm a MailChimp customer, but I would have never launched MailChimp Presents and said, oh, we're going to launch 11 programs simultaneously. We're going to do 4 mini documentaries. We're going to do 3 on shows and 4 podcasts and whatever they launch. That never, ever works. You never see a media company come out the gate. Huffington Post didn't come out and say, we're going to launch 400 different blog posts and call it Huffington Post. They launched one really good one. And then once they got a minimum viable audience, then they launched the second one and then the third one. And that's where brands always get it wrong. They're like, just because they can create content, they think they should. So I'm trying to go in there, and everything I'm doing with my writing and on books, I'm just saying, look, less is more here. Instead of doing 5 social media channels, be great at 1 or 2. Instead of doing a blog, a podcast, an event series, a webinar series, whatever, why don't you do an amazing blog, podcast, and an incredible e-newsletter, and forget the rest for a while. So that's where I think we've got to go with it. And that's how great media brands are built.
Yeah, speaking of podcasts, I feel like that's the main frontier now in content marketing. Like you see a lot more budget starting to be placed in podcast and starting to move towards podcasts. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, there's
deeper relationship.
Well,
right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't get a better relationship with somebody on a one-on-one basis than through audio. You just can't. And by the way, it is such an intimate way to communicate, and it's the only one that somebody listening can multitask to. It's the only one. I can mow the lawn and I could shovel the snow outside and I could be listening to that. I can't do that watching a YouTube video. So there's a big opportunity. It keeps going up every year. But I would say this, it is much better to first launch with an own component like an email newsletter program, and then secondarily a podcast. So because it takes a while, as you know, I mean, you've had a podcast for a while. I've had a podcast for a while. It takes a while to get these things off the ground, and search for podcasts is just the worst thing that's ever been created, because it hasn't been created. You really nobody can figure out podcast search. So what I would focus on, if you're starting fresh, is put off the podcast for just a second, build the email newsletter, build your database first, and then secondarily, that's your diversification. You diversify into podcasts. I think that's the best way to go. Now, if you want to start fresh off with the podcast, that's fine. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. So then I would make sure that you do some promotion in Overcast and through iTunes and whatnot to make sure that it's found.
So you eventually sold the Content Marketing Institute. What drove you to sell it? It
was all, my wife and I, we owned the company from the start, as we told you the origination story there. And I actually had it as one of the goals. I wrote this down in 2008, Simon, that the goal would always be to sell for X amount of money. And I wanted to sell it in 2015, even though I didn't know what it was when I wrote down the goal in 2008. Well, we couldn't hit it by 2015. We hit it by 2016. The number that we felt was kind of our forever number that we could leave. So decided to sell ultimately UBM, which is now Informa, sold in 2016. My wife stayed on until the end of the year, and I stayed on until the end of 2017. And it worked out fairly well. I mean, but the thing with me, I'm a big goals person. So I always have goals, and I sort of, I have a career goal. I have a financial goal. I have a philanthropic goal. I have a mental goal, a spiritual goal, physical goal, all those things I look at them religiously. And that was one thing. I woke up every day and I would look at that goal that we were going to sell by 2015 for millions of dollars. And it's so, when you look back at it, 2008, you're like, this guy is audacious. Like, where does he get off thinking he could do it? But I'm one of those Ted Lasso guys that if you believe enough, it'll happen. And you just have to read it every day. And after a while, you start to believe it.
And so what have you been up to since then? Like, you resurrected a marketing podcast you had hosted. Like, what's the strategy there?
So, yeah. And so in 2018, one of the best years of my life, I took off. I took a sabbatical year. I did a 30-day, no electronics, no social media thing in January, which is awesome. So I cleansed myself. And then the rest of the year had some travel time, some wonderful family time. I went to Sicily with my dad. He got to see all of his family. It was one of those bucket list trips. And then decided to, crazy enough, write a novel because I wanted my wife to actually read something that I wrote. So I wrote a mystery novel called The Will to Die and published that at the end of 19 and the beginning of 20. And Simon, I got to be honest, I was well on my way to just becoming a novelist. I was like, okay, great. I did my business thing. I did my entrepreneurship thing. I started writing on the second version of The Will to Die. And then COVID-19 hit. Actually, we started the lockdown like the week after my book launch, which was March 3rd of 2020 was our book party. And then, of course, after that, everybody was locked down. The whole thing happened. And I started to get pinged from people that read Content Inc., the book I wrote in 2015, and said, Joe, can you tell me more about this? Because they were losing their jobs. These are marketers and writers that were starting fresh. They couldn't find work. And I'm like, oh my gosh, maybe this is a thing. And then I looked and my book sales for the book had been going up since the lockdown. And I'm like, that's weird. Now, I know more people have more time to read and whatnot, but this is a 6-year-old book. Like why are people interested in this thing now? And started to get more pings on it. And I said, this is a thing. And I thought that I could be more helpful than just writing another fiction novel that a few thousand people would read. Maybe I could help some people out. So that's when I sort of restarted everything, restarted the Content Inc. podcast, which is a weekly 5-minute podcast for media operators. I launched, we had This Old Marketing, which I took off a year. We restarted that. That's a weekly covering the news with my friend Robert Rose. Goes out every Friday morning. Started the Random newsletter, which is, I'm just restarting the whole media engine. And in April of this year, I'm starting a thing called The Tilt, which is all focused on people that want to build a media company as part of their entrepreneurship journey. So I'm just very excited about this whole move from digital content creators. I love the whole thing that they're doing about building an audience, but so many of the people that I talk to don't know how to wrap a business model around it. And that's where I really think that I can add some value and cover that area. In a lot of cases like you are, because you're doing a fantastic job of covering these areas about like the Mr. Beasts of the world that are able to monetize their YouTube audiences outside of advertising. And I think this is going to be big and huge. And I want to be part of hopefully helping some people with that ride.
So you want to launch something that's geared, like before you were launching something that was targeted towards brands who wanted to create content, and now you're going to be targeting the creator economy, like this whole exploding ecosystem of either solo creators or small pockets of creators who are banding together and launching these kind of bootstrapped little media companies.
That's it. And that was the audience for Content Inc., which was weird because I was, Content Marketing Institute targets large enterprises, marketers at large enterprises. But I wrote Content Inc. in 2015 as a love letter because it was basically the story of how we launched Content Marketing Institute. And I, nothing against enterprise marketers, but I love working with entrepreneurs. I love working with people, digital content creators that are just trying to figure this thing out. And so that's why, Content Inc. So, dust that off. I've got the new version of Content Inc. coming out in May and with the new media company. And I've never seen, you're right in the middle of it too. All the people that are just doing, whether it's on TikTok or Substack or Instagram or, my good friend Wally Koval launched a brand called Accidentally Wes Anderson. They basically launched it through an Instagram picture per day. And he just had a best-selling book, Accidentally Wes Anderson, from a free Instagram feed, did that for 3 years, built up 1 million followers, and now he's got a best-selling book, and he's launching this whole travel brand around it. I don't think people talk about this, and you're doing it, a couple other people are doing it. I think we just need more focus on this area because I've never been so excited about it.
Yeah, it's definitely exciting to me. I'm trying to kind of sew the two worlds together as covering, some of the stuff going on in the larger media companies. But, if you listen to this podcast, read my newsletter, the vast majority of my interviews are with kind of smaller independent creators and stuff, or like media startups and stuff like that, because there's just so much stuff that's rising up that I don't know. It's just a very, very exciting time. The CEO, Jack Conte, the CEO of Patreon, is calling it, the second Renaissance, which will be exponentially larger than the first Renaissance.
It's a good call. Yeah,
super exciting.
There's a lot of truth to that, and I think that a lot of businesses don't necessarily see that coming. And I think it's liberating for. I mean, I've got 2 kids that I got one in college and one going to college right now, Simon. And and my youngest, who's trying to build an audience, will tell me, well, I don't know if I need to go to college to do this. Now, I want him to go to college. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I spent 7 years in college. I want him to go to college, but it's an interesting question. He can learn all about building an audience and building a media brand and doing amazing things with YouTube and Discord and every Khan Academy and everything in front of him right now. Now that I want him to meet like real people, like human beings, and go to college, but it's a tough decision today. These the older Generation Z right now and the younger Gen Y, it's unbelievable to see the things that they're accomplishing. I read the whole story on the whole Mr. Beast thing and the burger chain. It just blew me away. That is a possibility from somebody that started a Minecraft YouTube channel, folks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Joe, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
JoePulizzi.com, Pulizzi.com. I mean, the thing I got going right now is a little free giveaway. I wrote a book called Corona Marketing. It's a free ebook. It talks about 13 different things that marketing and publishing people need to think about as we try to get out of this lockdown and Corona marketing thing or Corona virus thing. So I put that together and put that for free, and you can get that at JoePulizzi.com.
Okay, awesome. Well, it's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks for joining us. I'm actually on the lookout for new guests for this podcast. So if you do interesting stuff in digital content, whether you're a full-time YouTuber, a media executive, or run a cool niche newsletter, definitely reach out. My email address is simonowens@gmail.com. Okay, see you next week.